The administration in the California prison system likes to subdivide inmates into smaller groups. It makes sense. You can't come up with many rules or policies that are going to apply to the nearly 200,000 inmates that were in CDC when I was locked up. But if you subdivide these groups by custody level, what prison they're at, what yard they're on, how old they are, whether or not they have a job, you start ending up with very small groups of inmates that you can come up with rules and policies that apply specifically to them. One of the ways that the administration subdivided inmates was by something called privilege group. You could receive a privilege group of A, B, C, or D, and then it would get a little more complicated because they could be A1A or D1D. Basically, your privilege group decided what privileges you would get from the administration. Some of the least important would be things like how much money you were allowed to spend in a month on the canteen or how much time you were allowed to spend on the phone. The more important would be things like whether or not you had to go to the SHU or whether or not you received more good time than other inmates. Some inmates receive 1 day of credit for doing 1 day of time, which makes sense, day for day. Others, because of their privilege group and their good behavior, can receive 2 or even 3 days of time for each day that they serve. So privilege group is a big deal. One of the things that was very important to me whenever I was at High Desert was the number of phone calls that you were allowed to make in a privilege group. You see, I was A2B at this point, which meant that I did not have a job, though I was willing to work if a job were provided to me. I told them that I wanted a job, there just weren't any available yet. I had to wait until somebody paroled or went to the hole or whatever and a job opened up. This could be 2 or 3 years. Inmates that were B privilege group, that's the B and A2B, are only allowed 1 phone call a month. This was going to be a real problem for me. I was going to have to choose between calling my wife or my mother on a monthly basis. And if I wanted to speak to people like my father, my brother, friends, it was going to be a seasonal or even yearly calendar. I had the option of gangstering phone calls is what it was called. You see, they don't actually turn the phones off whenever people are done with them, so even though I wasn't signed up on the phone list, if nobody was watching and nobody was on the phone, I could casually walk up and make a phone call. And in all likelihood, I wouldn't get in any trouble for it. It's something a lot of people did. I very rarely saw people get into real trouble for it. I started watching. Some officers cared. You'd hear them every 15 minutes announce who was allowed on the phone, what phone they were allowed on. Others cared a little. You'd see them turn off the phones occasionally, make sure that nobody was using the phone if they weren't allowed to. Some didn't care at all. I noticed that Officer DeWall, with whom I was acquainted, I've mentioned him in a video or two, just really didn't care about the phones. He turned them on whenever he got there, and he turned them off whenever he left 8 hours later. That was about it. So I started gangstering phone calls. At first I checked the rules and I made sure that the penalty wasn't too severe, and it really wasn't. If I were a repeat offender with this rule violation, I could eventually receive an extra 30 days added to my sentence. But I'd have to be found guilty multiple times, and before I could even be found guilty once, I was entitled to an official warning where somebody told me, "This is your warning, stop doing that." So I could essentially just break the rule until I was warned about it. I used the phone anytime that I wanted during Officer DeWall's shifts. I made sure to get all my phone calls done in that time because he didn't seem to care. Phone calls were, I think $5 to $20 each at this time and 15 minutes long, so it's not like I was going to spend hours on the phone. But there were a number of people that I wanted to talk to. After, about a month of doing this one day, Officer DeWall called me over to the tower. Hey, Channel, come up here, man." And I went over to talk to him. You look up at the officer in the tower to speak to him, and he looks down at you because he has a rifle, and this gives him a commanding position if he needs to shoot somebody. And he said, "Hey man, I didn't see you on the phone list. Are you allowed to be using the phone right now?" I was surprised he was calling me out on it. I told him, "Honestly, no, DeWall. Look, I didn't think you minded. I wouldn't have been on the phone if I thought you cared, but I didn't see you sweating anybody." And he kind of chuckled. He went, "Man, we're being honest, I don't care." I'm just noticing you're on the phone an awful lot for somebody who's not signed up on the phone list. What's going on? I decided to take a gamble. I liked DeWall. He seemed like a decent officer. And I explained to him that I made all my phone calls on his shift because he seemed like he didn't care. And the last thing I wanted to do was end up getting written up or get an official warning. Hey, this isn't my warning, is it? Look, if it's my warning, I'll stop right now. As soon as I get a warning, you'll never see me on that phone again, man. This time he actually laughed. He went, no, man, I don't care about the phone. Look, if I was really upset with somebody, it'd be my porter. Your old Selly Blanky, and don't think I don't know how this works, has your new Selly, Scooby, signed up like 4 times a day on the phone when he didn't used to use the phone at all. And then I see you using the phone on those time slots. Come on, man. It's okay. I don't care. Seriously. If anything, I'd just be mad at Blanky because I think you probably gave him a box of Sara Lee donuts or something, and I never got my cut. It was kind of fun. I got to talk to DeWall as, I don't know, just a person talking to a person maybe, because neither of us cared about the stupid rule. Rules, they can be a funny thing. I mean, I understand the logic of giving inmates privileges and then leveraging those privileges for good behavior. It makes sense to limit the number of phone calls somebody can make unless they behave themselves. I was in a bummer of a situation because I really was willing to work, they just didn't have any jobs for me. I was on waiting lists, and you can't use the phone while you're on a waiting list. That's not good enough. So I broke the rule. You figure a lot of people break a lot of stupid rules in life every day. Take a speed limit. We all break that speed limit by just a mile or two every once in a while. Maybe there's a couple of guys who never go over the speed limit, but whenever it says 65 and everybody's doing 70, you generally do 70 with it. It's maintaining the flow of traffic. But you figure maintaining the flow of traffic, it's only not breaking the law because everybody is breaking the law along with you. In the course of life, whenever you run into a law or a rule that's just stupid and wrong-headed and it shouldn't apply to you and you don't know why it's written down, you think I'm going to say break it. Maybe you should. I don't know. I don't know what the rule is. I don't know what the situation is. Maybe you should break it. Maybe you shouldn't. But I'll tell you that what you should do first is you should stop and you should think. You should take that moment. Because if you break a rule impetuously without thinking, you may not be able to fix the damage that you've done.